Witch House. Back in 1994, I was working on a seismograph crew in north central Texas, about 30 miles northeast of Midland, Texas. The job would take us walking miles off the road along the countryside, laying out cables and equipment. One day doing this, we came across an abandoned farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere. The house was a one-story stucco with a long front porch and the windows gone. The house had several oak trees around it. In the oak trees hung small dried animal carcasses of reptiles and rodents that are found in the area. But the strangest thing were the paintings that covered the house. The paintings were a graffiti of strange symbols and writings that I did not recognize or understand and have never seen before. Even though we can see it's hollow indoors, none of us would dare go inside. One of the workers had a camera and took a picture of the house. Shortly after that, I had left Texas and I didn't see any of those workers for a couple years and never really thought of that house. 2 years later, I was working in Gillette when I met the worker that had taken the picture. After work, I went to visit him in his hotel room. He took a bunch of pictures out of the work we did in Texas. At one point of going through the pictures, he asked if I remembered the old witch house I came across. I told him I did, and he pulled it out and showed it to me. I couldn't believe or understand what I saw. The house and trees were in the picture, but the strange paintings that covered the house were not there. All I saw was an old tan stucco house. La Bruja. This is 2 stories in one. This story takes place in the beautiful country of Mexico. I was about 10 years old. My family planned to vacation to my mother's hometown in Mexico. We live in Missouri and decided to drive there, so we had about a 2-day commute. Everything was fine until we reached the border of Mexico and Texas. We noticed that my mother was asleep and it looked as though she was having a nightmare. She began screaming, "No, no, don't touch me. Leave my family alone." Then she woke up. We asked her what happened. She said that she dreamt that as we were crossing the border, all the dead souls of Mexico began to surround the car and reach their arms into the car, grabbing her and the rest of us. She said there were hundreds of them, and they were trying to stop us from getting in. The odd thing about this is she dreamt about it being at the border when in reality, we were actually at the border. She couldn't have known about this, she was sleeping. So we made it through the border, and in about 8 hours later, we made it to her hometown. I do not remember much about the visit, but I do remember the day we went for a walk through the woods. It was a normal day, and me and my brother and sisters decided that there was absolutely nothing to do. All of the elders got together to make lunch, and we somehow were the only children there. We ate lunch and decided to go on an adventure throughout the woods. Little did we know, it was a bad idea. We walked down the dirt road until it came to a dead end. From there, we walked through the plains that led into a wooded area. We walked about 100 feet into the woods. Then it began to storm out of nowhere. This was very odd because it was a very sunny day and there was no sign of a storm coming. We all looked at each other very confused. Then, all of a sudden, we heard a woman cry. Her cry was painful and would end with a scream. I was so frightened we all just stood there frozen and didn't say a word. The cry began to sound like it was getting closer. We just stood there waiting to see what would happen. Suddenly, my sister let out the most horrifying scream ever. The rest of us looked at her and she was staring up into the trees. We all looked to see what she was looking at. I will never forget that scream, and I will never forget what I saw in the trees that day. A woman crucified about 40 feet up the tree. She looked down at us and we looked up at her. She was wearing a faded black torn dress. Her hair was dark and tangled. She had scars on her face and legs. She looked like a zombie. After a few seconds of us screaming and crying, we began to sprint out of the woods. We looked back and the woman was gone, but we kept running. As soon as we hit the plains, there was no more rain. We stopped running and recollected ourselves. We didn't understand why it wasn't raining anymore, and it looked like it had never even rained at all. We walked back into town and gathered with the elders. They noticed right away the terror in our faces and asked us about our whereabouts. We told them about our story, and to our surprise, they believed us. We cried as we told the story and then sat back to hear the elders' explanation. They explained that about 100 years ago, there was a woman who was accused of Brujeria, accused of being a witch. She was murdered by the townspeople. Before her assassination, when she would walk the streets, people would often throw things at her. Some would throw crucifixes. My grandmother said that there have been people that claim to see her in the woods, but most reports were made by children. The raining was explained to be a sign of pain and sin. This encounter traumatized me as a child. I will never forget the sound of the woman's cries followed by lightning and thunder. I couldn't speak of this to other children in school because no one believed me. I once told my best friend, but she laughed and said I freaked her out. After that, she never talked to me again. From there on, I never told any of my stories to the kids at school. Please feel free to comment. I am open for discussion. The Witch on the Window. Do you believe in ghosts? There are moments in my life where I've been asked this question, and every time I would answer, I'm not sure. I cannot easily reject it, because I know you cannot deny something that can't be seen by the naked eye alone. But accepting the possibility of an unknown and unseen being hovering near me at any place in time is quite unsettling. Though my acceptance of this particular issue is vague, my younger sister, on the other hand, is a different matter. Ever since she was young, she would have always claimed to see things that people don't normally see. My father used to tell me when they were both driving along the federal highway, they came across a huge pileup and an ambulance nearby. My father described the scene as horrific. The cars were twisted and bent out of proportion. His first thought was that there was no way anyone could have survived it. As they drove past, my sister looked and said, "Why is that man standing with his clothes all red and dirty?" My father, eyes still focusing on the road, was astonished at that person's luck and said to my sister that he was probably hurt bad from the accident. When they arrived home, my father told our family of the incident and urged us to watch the evening news that would probably cover it. As the news unfolds, the faces of the people involved in the accident were displayed on screen. My sister tugged at my father's shirt and pointed to the face of one of the victims. "Dad, that's the man I saw. What happened to him?" My father's face went pale. The faces shown were people who died in the accident. All of them died on the spot. I was curious, to say the least. I'm sure she wouldn't lie, but as I'm not there when it took place, I couldn't reach a definitive conclusion regarding the matter. As time went on, as most things in life, the memory faded away from me, the thought not resurfacing itself into my head. Until years later, my family moved into a new house a while ago. It was a 2-story bungalow with a large tree next to it. It looked like any typical house, really. As a day of rigorous unpacking ends, we all went to our respective rooms. My sister's room was conveniently located near the tree outside on the 2nd floor, where it can be looked through the room's window. I'm not sure if it was past midnight or before it, but the silence of our house that night was broken by screams of my sister. I rushed into my sister's room, my parents arriving earlier. She was sobbing uncontrollably, tightly embracing my mother. I was about to ask when I realized that this was probably related to her. It was her sensitive perception. I kept my mouth shut and quietly went back to my room. I'll probably get the answer clear tomorrow anyways. As I've anticipated, my sister told her story the next day during breakfast. She claimed that when she was about to go to sleep, she felt a cold breeze coming from the window. She went to close it, and then saw a figure crouching on the tree's branches, that of an old woman, hair as white as the moon itself, with claws on 3 on each hand, smiling and looking at her with crimson red eyes. I find her description at the time quite over the top, like something out of a stereotypical horror movie or something. I pushed aside my thoughts when she expressed her desire to change rooms. My father, who was quiet throughout the time, nodded and asked who would volunteer to exchange rooms with my sister. I gazed upon my other siblings, their eyes facing the ground, showing reluctance, maybe fear. I glanced at my sister to see her dejected face, although I find the whole time quite absurd. Seeing the pain expression on my sister made me make up my mind. I volunteered. My sister, beaming with delight, expresses her gratitude over and over. But then she said, "But brother, I know how you are. Please, don't do something stupid. Please." I nonchalantly nodded, not giving much thought to her words. Fate probably had disagreements regarding my attitude. That night, after relocating my stuff to my new room, I went to my desk to prepare the report for my upcoming presentation. I sat there for maybe an hour when I felt a cold breeze from behind. I glanced behind to see the window had opened slightly. At first, I paid no heed to it, with the thought that I'd probably not properly closed it. But then, I felt the urge to go have a look through the window, to confirm for myself of what my sister saw. I took slow, steady steps towards the window. The sounds of crickets outside matches my heart beating, and with feelings of uncertainty, I looked outside towards the tree. There was nothing there. Like an anticlimactic moment in a horror movie, I felt somewhat disappointed, but somewhat relieved. It was then that I felt quite stupid regarding the whole matter. I chuckled slightly, my thoughts at the possibility of someone or something to be dangling on a tree outside my room to be absurd. And with a confident tone, I said, "Hey, if you're really out there, why don't you show up in my face?" As those words left my lips, the sounds of the crickets outside and the breeze that blew just now suddenly died, leaving behind an eerie silence and nothingness. I stood there, frozen in place. I didn't know what to make of the situation. My imagination was getting the best of me, as I could almost swear that the branches were swaying on their own without any aid from the wind, as if the trees itself was coming to life. Ridiculous as it sounds, I even started to hear things, whispers to be exact, of what topic I'm not sure. Given the nature of the circumstances, I wouldn't be surprised if it was an issue best discussed only in hell. And to add it all up, images of a white-haired woman lunging at me kept popping inside my head. The whispers and images began to intensify to my horror, trying to push me over the edge of my own sanity. Suddenly, a knock came upon my door, purging my senses from those abominations. "Brother, are you awake?" my sister said on the other side of the door. The whispering, the moving branches, those horrid images in my mind, all had stopped. I bent on my knees, trying to catch my breath. I felt the wind had been struck out of me. I wiped away the sweat on my face, seeing the small puddle of water soaking on the wooden floor under me. A second knock came upon my door. "Brother, are you listening? Are you all right in there?" I could feel the urgency in her voice. "Yeah, I'm all right. My mind just wandered off a bit. Anything you need, sis?" I spoke out, trying to maintain my composure. "Just checking up on you," she spoke softly, out of relief perhaps. After a few moments in silence, she said again. I'm worried about you, brother. Nothing to worry about, sis, I almost stammered. You should go to bed. It's getting late. I think I'm going to sleep now. Okay, she said, hesitant in her reply, but then I heard her footsteps moving away from my door. As her footsteps faded away, I gathered my thoughts, trying to make sense of the whole matter. Was I imagining things? Did I become so paranoid I let my imagination get the best of me? My eyes darted to the clock hanging on my wall. 2 a.m. I've been standing by the window for hours. Slowly, my gaze shifted to the window in front of me, and with all the resolve that I still had in me, I picked myself up and looked through the window. There was nothing there. I must be tired, I thought to myself. I closed the window and went to bed and hoped for a good night's rest. I woke up the next day, feeling somewhat groggy. As the cobwebs cleared, I sat on my bed and tried to make sense of the event that occurred last night. Reaching no conclusion, I decided to consult my sister later. I got up from bed and went to the bathroom to take a shower. As I drenched myself under the shower, I suddenly felt a stinging sensation on my back. The pain was so terrible that I almost fell to the floor. I got out of the shower and went in front of the mirror with my back facing it, trying to see if there were any cuts. To my horror, the reflection showed that there were 6 long scratch marks on my back. Each 3 were on the left side, and the other on the right side of my back. I never told my family, especially my sister. I didn't want to upset them. I tried telling myself to believe that I caused the scratches on my back when I was asleep. Some days I even believe in it. To my relief, for the few months that my family stayed there before we moved out for unrelated and trivial reasons, that was the last time something like that occurred. As suddenly as it happened, there were no longer similar occurrences happening, leaving behind a deeply imprinted memory in my mind. As I end this story, I try to reflect on what had happened, trying to make sense of all of this. Though regarding this matter, nothing is certain, I suppose. The Witch. Ghost, apparitions, witches, all seem to fall in the same paranormal grouping. So here is a witch story. Summer came like a wonted pleasure, the sun gently caressing down as dew began to absorb into a rich earth, which began to spew forth hope. Blazing green shards of grass fought to cover the dying down jilted lawns, and the elliptical-shaped buds unveiled organic hands outstretching to catch the golden rays. Yes, summertime, a beautiful time, a time of evil. A child sees life through a different set of eyes, and I was no different. My father had been very ill and was dying, but I did not know. He was a pilot and was gone most of the time, so when he came home to stay, I was happy and did not know there was another reason, nor did I care. I had my dad home, and that was all that mattered to me. The Adobe House we moved into was in a little Spanish village in northern New Mexico. Velocitas. It was a town of about 320 people, all of which worked in the local lumber mill that was owned by my uncle. The house itself was 2 stories and had a wooden veranda at the back and right side. The house was very old and still had a wood stove as a heat source and to cook on. There was no running water, so an outhouse was your only option, and baths were in a clawfoot tub that you would fill with pots of water you heated on the stove. The backyard was a tangled remnant of what used to be a beautiful orchard of apples and cherries. You could tell by the scantily built houses that adorned the remainder of the town that the large Adobe House was owned by someone of prominence, and although times had been harsh to it, there was still a majestic beauty about its confines, and I wonder why it remained empty. Soon, I would find out. Old school Spaniards are very devout in religion, and also have a strong sense and believe in the occult, so it made sense that I was informed that a witch had owned the house, and after she had died, no one would as much as step foot on the property, hence the lack of maintenance, even in the orchard. The decaying once white wooden fence post that staggered along the roadside in front of the house reminded me of small soldiers standing in some type of ragtag formation, the rotting wood giving each one its own personality. A small creek ran along the left side of the house and was surrounded by dozens of small trees. The trees themselves reached across to grasp one another and form a fissure where the sparkling water gurgled and splashed its way down only to reach a small river that cut through the center of the town, dividing north from south, poor from poorer. A small bridge leaped over the gap and looked as if it frowned with the sides of its mouth creased from one side to the other. It was on the first night that we felt something was not right. There was a terrible scratching sound emitting from beneath the floorboards of the house, and the lights would flicker on and off. My father assumed that a family of mice lived under the house, and with this place being so old, the wiring was faulty. I accepted that and went upstairs, climbed into the top bunk of my old pine bunk bed, snuggled in and went to sleep. A strong smell of feces and rotten eggs assaulted me throughout the night, and I found myself pulling up the blankets back up multiple times as they seemed to wander to my feet. An eeriness echoed with the scrapping of limbs from the large tree behind the house, and I felt as if I was being watched. The hairs on my arms was raised, and a brisk coldness lumbered in the air. The next day, my mother made fresh tortillas laden with melted butter and honey for breakfast. I had never had cooked food on a wood stove, and it was marvelous. The memories of the night slipped away. The tree behind the house had a rope descending from a large outstretched branch, and as I watched as it swayed back and forth in the warm summer breeze, a small green apple was visible just out on the branch, and with the use of the rope, I was able to climb up to the limb. As I reached out for the apple, I felt a hard shove across my back. Clawing to save myself from certain doom, I was able to grab the rope to slow my fall and end up with just a bruised leg. Still being young, I started to cry and was soon met by my mother and brother, who ran out of the house to see what was wrong. Other things began to happen, not just to me, but to my family. My sister swears an old lady was looking at her in her bedroom mirror, and our family dog suddenly attacked my brother. My mother could never find her keys and always yell at me for playing with them, which I never did. None of the kids would come to my house and play. They said their parents would not let them as the house was cursed and a witch lived there. So as a young boy, I was hurt by something inside, as it told me they were right. So I did not push the issue. Everyone in the family knew something was wrong, but we didn't talk about it. Dad's health was getting worse and worse, and we really had nowhere else to go. So we just ignored the strange behavior in the house. Summer was coming to an end, and we had been at this house for several months. Besides the eerie things that had happened so far, and the occasional sighting of an old lady in the mirror, life seemed rather usual. That was all about to change. It was late on a weekday night, and once again, I was having a tug of war with my blanket. When a loud scream came from downstairs, I could hear my father jump out of bed and my mother close behind. Suddenly the house seemed to shake. The bunk bed began to raise up and slam down, up and down, up and down. I began to cry, and my brother yelled out. My sister was screaming for help in the other room, and everything started to twist. Enter the witch. The side door to the veranda near our bunk bed suddenly slammed open, and a dark creature resembling an old lady had appeared. The smell of rotten eggs and death became strong. Hair of putrid yellow seemed to glow, and the eyes and mouth were darker than the night itself. This creature had a heavy, raspy breathing that echoed in the room and made the hair stand up on my neck. Then she screamed, "Get out!" The voice sounded like 1,000 voices thrown together and resembled a growl. My father stood in the entryway on the opposite side of the room, and the look on his face was of pure terror. He could not make a sound. My mother was calling out frantically to him, but he just stood there frozen. His already white, sick skin had now turned opaque. The bookshelf had somehow fallen over, and the books were now flying about, slapping into the wall with a thud, only to start flying again. It was at that moment that my mother fell to her knees and started to pray. Just as soon as she started, it stopped. We stared at one another for a long time, in utter disbelief at what we had just witnessed. I began to cry as realization set in, and we all huddled together. After my father had turned on all the lights and locked all the doors, my mother told us to grab what we wanted to keep, because we would not be back. So we gathered our things and quickly ran to the car. The next morning at my uncle's house, I remember listening to them talk. My uncle's voice quaked in disbelief, and I heard my aunt tell my father she had warned him. Had they known? I never went back to that house until I was in my 30s. The house is still there, but the lumber mill long since closed, and the town seemed empty. A few still remained, but they went inside and would not engage my conversation. The Adobe House still stood at the top of the hill and looked just as I had remembered it. I did go inside, as it was obvious that no one lived there. Besides the staggering amount of crosses, pentagrams, and various graffiti on the walls, the house looked the same, although somewhat smaller. My old pine bunk bed was still there, with the name Frog scratched into its surface. Frog was my nickname when I was young. I could still smell feces and rotten eggs. I have never been back. Looking on Google for the correct spelling of the name of the town, I was shocked to see a listing and a YouTube video of an Adobe house for sale. Although it was not the same house, the town is right. The house for sale belonged to a little boy named Sammy. His house was right before the bridge, near the old church. We would get fresh milk from Dairy Barn across the street. His parents never let him come to my house, but we would play on the side of the main road leading into the town. Part of the mountain had collapsed, and we were rolled down the sandy side. Hello to Tiny, who ran the general store across the street from our house. She would give me free candy and a blessing, as she knew how poor we were, even though I did not. P.S. I had almost forgotten the story, as I was only 8 at the time. My sister brought it up when I told her I put the story of my ghostly visitor on the site. So, with vague memories and a little encouragement, here, I post again.